Hello and welcome back to the Lib Dem Podcast. Now we have something a little bit different for you now, but hopefully something you'll find really interesting. So joining me is one of our regulars, David Mackenzie. Hello, David.
Hi, John.
But a special guest, we have Els Otterman, who is from the Dutch party Water Natuurlijk. So welcome to the podcast, Els. And could you give our listeners just a introduce yourself and what is Water Natuurlijk?
Yes, well, it's nice to be here. I am Water Natuurlijk is a specific political party that only takes part in the elections for the regional water boards in the Netherlands. The regional water boards are, our local council, our local authorities that deal with water management, dike reinforcement, dike management, but also water quality. And Water Natuurlijk works together with D66, liberal green party, so to say, in the Netherlands, your sister party, and the Green Party in the Netherlands, more or less. So we're an independent party, but we cooperate quite intensely with those two parties. And I'm an elected member of the executive board of one of the regional water authorities, the Stichtse Rijnlanden. I won't ask you to to repeat that. In the center of the Netherlands, around Utrecht, in the Utrecht area. So.
And David, you arranged this for Els to come on the podcast because, as we know, over the last year, the Lib Dems have had huge campaigns to do with water quality and to do with the quality of our rivers and our waterways. So, David, I'll hand over to you. But why did you think this would be a good idea, and what kind of brought you in to why would our listeners want to listen to this?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, John. So, and thanks, Els, first of all, for joining. Really appreciate it, and it's really interesting to get an overview as well of Water Natuurlijk and obviously the Dutch system as well. Look, one of our biggest campaign priorities for the exceptional results that we delivered in the election just gone was obviously around this issue of pollution within our rivers and waterways in the UK, which has become substantial under the last government. And really, we need to look at how we reverse course and get us back to where we previously were. I think from my perspective, I've always had an interest in the Dutch system of direct democracy and how they manage that. Obviously, as a party, we like to talk about how we actually disseminate power from Whitehall down towards other regional and local authorities. And I think it would be an interesting conversation to understand how that works in actuality in the Dutch system, but also, just a little bit of a conversation around, how it works with having specific parties that focus on particular policy areas. So that was really why I thought this would be an interesting conversation, and delighted to have Els on to talk about that. So Els, just as we touch on this, it would be probably interesting for our listeners to just understand a little bit of perhaps the concept of the Dutch water boards and the history of why they are directly elected bodies. If you could give us a little bit of an insight into that.
Yes, sure. The history of the regional water boards is a very long history. I think the first regional water board, Rijnland, in the area of Leiden, was already constituted in, I don't know, the 13th century. So it's a long history, and I think it started off because the people understood that cooperation was very important in maintaining the dikes and in draining the marshes in the marshy area of the west of the Netherlands. If you wanted to go and live there and do agriculture there, then you needed to cooperate in draining the land. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to use the land. So that's the history how they started off until the 50s, 60s, 70s of the latest century. There were a lot of regional water boards, tens, hundreds of them, but in the last few decades they have been merged into 21 in the 21 that we have now, and they have been professionalized, and direct elections via elections is only 15 to 20 years old. And before that, there were elections, but because the regions were a lot smaller, just individual persons could be elected, so not related to political parties. So there's been a lot of change in the system, but the whole system already exists for centuries. And water quality tasks have been gone from the provinces to the water boards in the 90s of the latest century. So there's been a lot of change in what we do as water boards.
Sure, and just Els, for our listeners as well. So compared to the UK system, and we obviously discussed this previously. So you cover water quality, sewage treatment, obviously the maintenance of canals and dikes, etc. But you don't do drinking water, and there's other areas that are specifically removed from the water boards, aren't there?
Yes, drinking water is in the Netherlands arranged by private companies, but they are the shareholders of the private companies are provinces and municipalities, so they're more or less publicly owned companies. And we also have Rijkswaterstaat, who deals with the main river, the water quality of the main rivers like the Rhine and the Meuse and the North Sea and things like that. So, but the wastewater treatment, that is our task as in the regional water boards.
Yeah. Great. So I was just going to ask kind of a bit of a kind of two-pronged question. So first of all, I'd be really interested to know why you yourself wanted to get involved with the water boards and get elected to it, but also you are actually involved in local government yourself as well. So it'd be really interesting to understand what the relationship is like between the Dutch water boards, sort of local, regional, and national government.
Well, I think the whole political system in the Netherlands is different from the UK system. How you have the regional representation, we don't have that in the Netherlands. We have direct elections on the national level, but also on the provincial level. We have the national level with our first and second chamber. The second chamber is like your House of Commons, and our first chamber is like more or less like your House of Lords. But it works a bit different. Then we have the provinces. They also have direct elections. That is, we have 12 provinces, regional with regional councils, and then we have 350 municipalities that have their own also elections and council, and in the Netherlands we have a system of coalitions. It hardly ever happens that one party has a majority on its own, so you always have to cooperate to form an executive board in every democratic systems that we have. And the regional water boards are more or less the local governments that stand next to the municipalities, and we deal with only one subject, which is water, but that includes wastewater treatment, management of the dikes, which is quite a large thing in the Netherlands, and the maintenance of our whole regional water system, which is also a lot. We have hundreds of kilometers of smaller streams and that we have to maintain, and so that's how more or less how the whole system works.
Yeah, sure. And what I was going to ask was it seems like, from what I can see anyway, and apologies, I'm just looking at Wikipedia, so my knowledge may not be 100% factually correct, but it does seem like the general public are quite engaged in the elections to the water board, so you have a decent level turnout for those. I would just be interested to understand what the kind of public perception is of having direct democracy to levels like Dutch water boards, and is there kind of a high level turnout for those elections?
there's been a lot of debate on that in the past 20 years, and the reason why, for example, D66 supports Water Natuurlijk was because they were against maintaining the regional water boards. They thought all the tasks could go to the provinces, so they wanted to stop the whole system of regional water boards. In 2007, around that time, the system was changed, so they didn't want to take part in the elections, and that's why they supported Water Natuurlijk. And well, they have kept doing that since that time, but there's no such thing in their program anymore that they want to get rid of the regional water boards. But there's been a lot of debate on that, and I think the first elections where there was political parties involved, that we had direct elections in where you had to go to the polling station and vote, was, I think, very little people showed up to come and vote, and then they decided to do it at the same time as the provincial elections, and that helped, of course. But so now the percentage that shows up for the elections is more or less comparable to the provincial elections. But still, some people think, what can be political about water management? Huh? Do you have left-wing dikes or right-wing dikes? But, well, indeed, I think, you have to decide on things that are scarce. So there's always a political decision in that. So, but I think the idea, the people that are involved in the political system of the regional water boards, a lot of them are more than average interested in the whole water system, and they know a lot more, I think, about the water system than just an average person in the Netherlands. So it attracts different people.
Yeah, sure. And that's quite interesting, because obviously you say you know more. Is that something you felt going into your elections to become a member of the water board, that you were very, very interested in this, or just something that maybe you had a particular view on, and now you have a vast understanding of how the actual management of dikes and waterways actually works?
I was a consultant in spatial planning. I'm a geographer. I studied geography, and I was actively in spatial planning. And I was always, during whole my career, very surprised, amazed how little the water sector was involved in deciding where to build and how to build in this delta under the sea level. So I thought that the water sector should put a step forward in doing this, and that was the main reason that I wanted to become involved in the regional water boards. And I've been also always more or less politically interested, and my father was in the local council, and I was involved in the local party here in the village where I live, and so that's how I ended up in the regional water board.
I think a lot of us end up getting pulled in by family members. Obviously with my dad being an ex-politician, you end up getting sort of dragged into understanding a lot of it when you're a child, and then becoming part of this crazy world. But John, I was going to bring you in just here, because I think what would be a great understanding, with you being obviously a councillor yourself, and just to give that comparison between the UK and the Netherlands, is just as in your work as a councillor, the relationship that in the UK you have with looking after water management for your residents. How easy or difficult do you find that, and do you think perhaps maybe some more level of involvement would be better in the UK?
Well, it's kind of I have kind of mixed views on how much direct democracy should happen, because at the moment it can be frustrating, because if you have, whether it's United Utilities or the Environment Agency, you can ask them to do things, but you have no power to compel them. Now the Environment Agency is obviously their agenda, their budget, their chairman is all are decided by the government, so there's always a political oversight when you get up to that level. But in terms of, because I think so I think listening to your expertise, Els, sounds absolutely brilliant. You think, oh, you'd love to have that in Britain, where you'd have that level of expertise and passion for something in these areas that then people could go and vote for. But the other side of that is, if you go to its very next degree, is how that then plays out in America, where they elect everything, from judges and everything else, and it then becomes highly politicized, things that shouldn't be. So I wonder, how do you get that balance right, Els, between being an expert but also being a politician? Because sometimes that is a very difficult thing to have to balance.
Yes, difficult question.
Sorry.
Well, I'm not an expert on water management. Well, I learned a lot. I've been doing this for 6 years. I learned a lot. I know a lot by now about maintaining dikes, because that's my main task in the executive board. So I'm not a real expert, but I have would you say affinity in I wouldn't call myself an expert when I started, but I get your point. And of course, our justice system, for example, there's no direct elections. So that is, I think, I don't feel there's a threat that will happen. And the history of the regional water boards has been very long. And the thing that I didn't tell is that we have our own tax system. We can levy taxes for water and for water management. And the idea behind it is that in the Netherlands, it's so crucial for maintaining dikes and good water management, that it is good to have a separate tax for this, so that there is no competition with other areas that might seem more important on the short term.
Whenever anything happens in the UK, there's always a pressure of value for money. I mean, Britain at the moment has very high levels of taxation, in terms of it's the highest since the Second World War, and a lot of pressure to, say, reduce taxes. So how then do you, again, get that balance between? But one of the other things we've noticed, because the British system, or particularly with sewage, we know that the privatized companies have taken vast amount of money out of the system and not invested. And so now the new Labour government is going to have to figure out, okay, how do you fix that? How do the billions of pounds that are needed to make that work? Now, with you being directly elected and the ability to raise your own particular tax or levy onto it, again, how do you get that balance right between, okay, we know we're going to need this funding, but it's a really tough time, for example, for people to actually put up more taxes. So again, how do you get that right?
Well, we have local taxes, we have water board taxes, and we have national taxes that are mostly taken from your income tax, and of course the value added tax and things like that. We find that we have a system where where the people that can't pay for the taxes, that we can I don't know the term in English, but we can tell them you don't have to pay it if you are below a certain level of income. So we have that system. But I think we also people get value for money. They pay in our region. They pay, well, an average family pays like 400, 500 euros a year, which is like €1 per day. You get a lot of water safety. We maintain all the dikes for that. We do a lot of the sewage cleaning. So I think in the past few decades we've we've shown that we need value for money, but of course that is also the biggest political issue in our council, in our board. It's always about how much can the taxes be raised, and of course that's always a difficult decision. But on the other hand, one of the other regional water authorities had problems with levying taxes, and they had a lot of taxes, and they raised their taxes with about 30% the past year. And you hardly see anything in the newspapers about it. So, I think it also, a lot of people pay their local taxes and their water board taxes automatically, so you don't really see it. I don't know. It's there's not so much debate about it, but and we also, within the water boards, we realize that with climate change, we have a huge task to do in the coming years, and we warn people that we won't be able to do that without raising taxes, because living in this delta, we have to always work on it very hard, and that will cost money. But still, of course, we have a lot of discussion about that. Yes, but we've managed to to arrange it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I find that quite interesting, because and John can maybe discuss a little bit more around the context in England. But from my context of having lived in Scotland, obviously we have a national government in the Scottish Parliament, and then obviously we have local government as well. And what I think quite interesting is that from a Scottish perspective, that the Scottish Parliament has tax raising powers and has never used them, and has been very cautious not to raise taxes comparable with the rest of the UK, even though in some areas we do have significant challenges compared to the rest of the UK. There's a report that came out yesterday. I know this is going slightly off topic, but there was a report that came out yesterday about a massive surge in drug deaths in Scotland in comparison to the rest of Europe. However, the governing party in Scotland is not making the case about why they would need to raise taxes to invest in, dealing with that situation. What's quite interesting as well is they even say to local government that your local taxation is your council tax, as it's called in the UK, should be capped and frozen. And if councils who are strapped for cash refuse to follow that order, they will have parts of their budget stripped away by national government as a kind of punishment for raising taxes. It just seems in comparison that you would not have that type of directive coming from national government, that you cannot raise taxes if you feel that is necessary.
No, I don't think the national government has that power, but I know that I haven't heard about it in the last few years, but before that, if there were water boards that raised their taxes more than 5% per year, they were invited by the water department, to tell why. But in the past few years, most water boards have raised their tax. I think there's not any water board that has raised their taxes less than 5% in the past few years. So I think I've never heard about it again. But of course, people are not very willing to raise taxes. But if there's no other way, then you have to. But I maybe the idea in the Netherlands is a bit different. But then again, I'm more on the left wing of the political spectrum, so to say. So in my the people that I share opinions with are maybe think about it differently than a lot of people that I don't speak so often with. But of course, people complain about taxes, and especially the farmers, because farmers, they pay as their company, farming companies, they pay quite a bit of money. Because the water boards also do a lot of work for draining the land in a lot of areas for the sake of agriculture. So they pay a lot of money, and of course, from that side, we hear a lot of complaints about the high taxes. Yes.
Right. I was going to ask in terms of, we obviously had significant involvement from the general public and a recognition about how bad the situation had become in the UK with pollution in our rivers and waterways. I would dare to say, John, I think that issue of pollution really caught on, but I guess perhaps maybe the wider context of talking to the general public about management of our waterways outside of pollution is probably a more complex and difficult sell to get them to engage in. So things like, how that can help deal with flooding, for instance, which is a major issue in parts of the area which I live in, and having better management and looking at how you do the cure rather than having to deal with it once it crops up. But I guess also the main idea of just how this will be affected by climate change as well. I was just wondering, Els, if I could ask about, how do you as a maybe Water Natuurlijk, but also maybe wider, just as a representative on the water board, get the public to buy into the purposes and the things that the water board are actually responsible for and why they're so important?
Well, that we find a struggle to show the people what we're doing. That's also, I think, where the popularity of the elections. Well, they're not so popular in elections. That's a problem. And some people say, well, we've done our work too well, so people don't see what we have to do every day to keep this country livable for so many people. But I don't know if that's the case. But I think about 10 years ago, the OECD did a review of our water management system in the Netherlands, and one of the things that they said was a very good point in the Netherlands was our special taxes for the water board, so that you don't have to compete with sexier spendings, but the weak point was that a lot of people don't realize our vulnerability towards sea level rise and how much work we have to do every day to live and work here. So that is a struggle for us. And to make people realize how much millions, billions we need for maintenance of the dikes and the sea level rise, how that influence us. So that is a struggle.
Yeah, and do the we spoke about this offline, but do the Fierliepen people, do they understand it a bit better? And then I'll explain to the listeners what that means.
I think historically the farmers and the people who come from a farming family, they know pretty well what the water boards do, because they have direct contact with the people from the water boards. But the people who live in the city, they are a lot further from our work. So a lot of people in the city don't really realize what we do for the money that we levy them.
Yeah, John, for your knowledge, when I was talking about Fierliepen, that is there is a sport in the Netherlands where people use large sticks to sort of pole vault themselves over canals. And reach over to the other side of the canal. So I was going to say, I think they might understand canal management a little bit better, because a lot of them end up in the canal. But Els, that's probably slightly offensive, because that's a different part of the Netherlands than you're from, that mostly engage in that activity.
Oh, in the region that I'm from, that I work for, it's also quite popular in the western part of our area, which is the marshy between Utrecht and Gouda. There's a lot of polstok verenigingen. So and it is mostly in the rural areas that it's popular. So that's why my relation with the farmers was made. So I think the field people understand what the water boards do very well. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I suppose as well, if you're going to end up in the waterways or the rivers yourself, you probably want to make sure that they're actually not polluted, so you don't get ill.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No. So, I guess the other interesting thing would be, and I know this is a slightly hypothetical question, but I think I shared with you some information about how actually badly polluted our rivers have actually become. I would have to imagine that if there was a situation like that to crop up in the Netherlands, there would be major public outrage. I mean, there is public outrage in the UK, but I would have to imagine that it would never have been allowed to get as bad as that under having, the system that you have managing them.
I don't know. I read the articles that you sent me, and I think the problem has already started in the 80s of the last century, when before even the water companies were privatized, where there was no direct where they couldn't get capital to invest in new things. I think that's a major problem, and that's we have the drinking water companies. They are publicly owned companies, but also the energy infrastructure in the Netherlands. They have more or less the same governance, and now we have a problem with investing in energy infrastructure, with the energy transition and everything. So that's the articles that you sent me with the problems of there's not enough money to invest in things. That's also what we see now in the drinking water companies and the energy infrastructure, because they are not allowed to ask more money for drinking water and for energy than the cost price. So if you need to invest because things are happening, for example, with the energy transition, now that we have a lot of solar panels, and we also have that same problem, but it's still publicly owned companies. So I think we will solve it. And of course, if you have really privatized them, then it's a different discussion. But it also, what I also read on the articles is that you can give permits to those companies, but you also have to monitor and enforce the regulations, and that also seems to be a problem. And I think, we do that, I think, pretty well in our water board, because we find that important, and you can't have regulations if you don't monitor and enforce them. It's also, you don't want the good people to be affected by the people who not obey the rules. But it's also vulnerable, I think. In the Netherlands, it's always vulnerable. If you have too much political influence on these permits or the enforcement, then that's also vulnerable in the Netherlands, I think.
Yeah, John, you look like you're wanting to come in.
No, I'm curious to see what you as the UK could learn from it, and what kind of you think have been the best successes of your model in terms of preparing yourself for the future.
Well, I think because, but it's also my personal and my political opinion that if you have a societal infrastructure that you need, you better keep it publicly owned, or somehow your public influence on it very strongly, because it's in the interest of all the people in the country that you maintain that well, that you make it well, that you develop it well. So, and I think we also have a discussion now on the hospitals and the public transport, why it doesn't really work if you don't have a real if the companies can't really compete, like hospitals and also in our public transport system, then the idea of a private company and competition doesn't really work. So, and I recently read a new article in our newspaper that some researcher said, if it is a really societal interest, then the public government usually does a better job than private companies. But of course, that's not, that's my public opinion, my personal opinion, and I think that is stronger in the Netherlands than in Britain.
Yeah, well, I think that's somewhat true, John, in that we do have these private investments into public infrastructure that really are effectively running as monopolies in certain areas where they have no competition or nobody that if you're getting a bad level of service, that you can say, right, I'm leaving you and I'm going to someone else that can provide me a better quality service. We've seen it obviously happening in the in our public transport and trains as well, where it's like you are given a monopoly on a single line and can create major problems when people don't want to invest or deliver a high level quality service for the general public. I guess the debate we're probably going to have within the party is about can you take these institutions back into public hands, or is there a better way to deliver on that with maybe levels of cooperation between government and public private investment?
I think, well, you can't change your system overnight into a public system, of course. So I'm not an expert on that, but I'm sure you can. You have to think of ways to combine those two, or at least that you make rules or conditions that companies have to obey, rules so that you can enforce those rules, and that they are taken seriously. But of course, that's maybe that's also a culture thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are always in the UK stuck in an endless debate between the right view of the world and the left view of the world, because we have such a dual party system compared to obviously in the Netherlands, where you do have the emphasis on coalition and cooperation and agreement. We have a debate between everything should be publicly owned to everything should be privately owned, and there's really no consensus in the middle about perhaps there are certain things that are better handled by private hands and there's certain things that are better owned by public institutions. So it's kind of I think a debate that will rage on for some time, unfortunately for us, Els. But it's we are just not in this country seem to be conditioned for coalition. I mean, we're John. We probably know better than anyone about what happens in the UK when you go into coalition. It doesn't tend to work out well for some.
No, that's right. And I suppose one of the frustration things that in the UK is that longer term view is often missing from the public debate. Like I said, David, it tends to be very binary, or like all public, all private, and that kind of nuance is sometimes missed because they think, right, it's all about the next election. Whereas I don't know if you're winning me over, into maybe this should be a policy that the Lib Dems should pursue to actually have this. But again, it's a really complicated one, because you think of something like the way that Britain goes is it tends to want a figurehead rather than an actual board. So if you think of something like the old policing boards were replaced with a police and crime commissioner or elected mayors, and I don't see that as an improvement. It's that, again, I've talked a bit about balance going forward, that the system's clearly not working as it is in Britain, where we have private companies as basically as private monopolies. So we get none of the benefits and all the bad things of that. And I do wonder at some point, because it was really noticeable about when the water industry and sewage came up, it was the first kind of issue that started Boris Johnson's decline, because it tapped into that self as, well, if we can't even go swimming in our rivers, or we can't go into our beaches without getting ill, then what does that say about modern Britain? And I think something has got to change. And I do wonder if your way is the way forward.
Maybe that's for your party. It's a task to serve that middle, huh? But of course, with your system, it is difficult, huh? Where we have a tradition of coalitions, so that the shock of an election is not that big, huh? From liberal to or conservative to Labour Party. There's always more or less a smooth transition into a new coalition, although we have, well, I don't know what is going to happen in the Netherlands with after the last elections. It's certainly an adventurous time here in politics. But on the other hand, you can also, I was in Scotland in June, and I spoke to someone a German woman who had lived in Germany and then moved to Scotland, and she said, in Germany everything is arranged by rules, and well, it's more or less the same in the Netherlands. And in Scotland, in Britain, there's a lot more room for individual people to be creative and find their own creative solutions. That's the other side of it. And well, I told David last week that we cooperate as a regional water board also with the UK, because in crisis management, we don't have a lot of experience with a real crisis, because we don't have often real crisis where the dike collapses, but in the UK it happens more often, because you also have a different philosophy by acceptance that sometimes you have flooding, because well, maybe you also calculate that it's cheaper to have it happen, and people are insured, than spending all the money on maintaining the dike. So it's also a different philosophy, and I think we can learn from that as well, or we can find inspiration from that as well. So it's not all that we are doing everything perfect and you're messing it up in the UK. It's also a different philosophy, I think, and that's probably also your culture and your history and tradition. And
yeah, we've got councillors like John that are obviously too laid back on these things. That's the
yeah, oh yeah, don't God, you sound like some of my residents, honestly.
No. So Elsa, I mean, I guess one of my final questions would really be, and I appreciate this is again a bit of a speculative question, but I guess based on your experience on how you're dealing with a lot of challenges in terms of flood risk and obviously the advance of climate change, if the Liberal Democrats were to ask yourself or Water Natuurlijk what issues you think would be most important for us to consider in regards to water management, is there any specific areas that you think Water Natuurlijk have campaigned on that are real issues that you think are things that perhaps would be replicable here?
Well, we haven't discussed sort of sustainability issues, and well, we think, and Water Natuurlijk, of course, as well. We have a very high focus on biodiversity and sustainability and CO2 reduction, because we also feel that we are threatened by climate change very much by sea level rise, and the same I think is true for the UK. So in order to survive in climate change, you also have to work on reduction of CO2 levels, and so we have a very clear focus on how we do our work as well. And our wastewater treatment is, I think, rather innovative. And we try to reduce gases that come from it, and we try to reuse the wastewater and get all kinds of things out of it to circular economy. I think you can also focus on that and how you do your work. So do it in a sustainable way, so that you also take your responsibility in reducing CO2 levels and hopefully reduce the climate change in that sense as well.
But that's really interesting, because that's I think maybe some people wouldn't even think about the kind of wider context of the what is the cause of these issues. Yes, we are here to manage these issues, but also looking at preventative measures as well as a huge piece. I mean, I know that the Scottish Liberal Democrats, which is the Scottish arm of the Liberal Democrats, has done a lot in terms of how do we get our peatlands back in Scotland, which obviously retain a lot of carbon dioxide, which obviously helps with our CO2 emissions. But sometimes, it's can sometimes be a very difficult thing to get national and government to buy into, about, hey, maintaining these areas as natural landscapes to deal with these effects, as opposed to, hey, let's build new housing, which obviously, yes, we do need, but you've got to take into the wider context of how that may affect the country going forward. John, I don't know if you had any other questions or anything that you wanted to put to Els.
No, not really. Just a huge thank you from me, really. Just I found it absolutely fascinating, and seeing what ways we could potentially go, which way we can campaign, because I think Britain seems stuck, and I think we're going to need some innovation to get out of where we are at the moment, because no one's happy. And so maybe these other models are something we need to consider, but there's no perfect system either. That's the other thing. So no matter what system you ever choose, people are going to find there's either faults or wrinkles that you have to iron out. But just a huge thank you from me, Els. I think it's been absolutely wonderful. And David, anything further you want to say before we wrap this up?
I guess the only other things I was going to ask, Els, were for Water Natuurlijk as a party, I guess, what do you foresee as being sort of your next goals as a party in the next sort of coming elections? And also, will the party maintain being purely for water board elections, or do you think there's any chance, given how you've talked about how essential climate change is going to be and how it affects the Netherlands, do you think there's any potential changes down the line for that, to maybe become a national party as well?
No, I don't think so. Because we have this cooperation with D66 and GroenLinks, the Green Party, and I think they will be the parties that will maintain on the national and the regional level. So I don't see that happening.
Yeah.
And our main aims, we don't have we will still focus on sustainability and climate change adaptation. Biodiversity is also nature restoration. The biodiversity is a big issue, but also if you want to look after the water, you also have to have your influence on the land, the spatial planning, where you build and how you build, and I think that will be main focus for our party in the coming years, as it has been in the past years. But we haven't reached our goals yet.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, because this is a kind of a follow-up question to what you've just said there. So, in terms of the relationship with D66 and the Green Party, do they take a lot of your your outcomes and the things that you discover, working on water boards, and take that up to national level? It'd just be interesting to understand a little bit more about the dynamic of that relationship.
I think that could be better than it is now, but in the wastewater treatment is really a water board thing. We cooperate between the water boards a lot, and I'm sure on the professional level, a lot of people are working together, and consulting companies work together and bring the knowledge from water boards to the other way. What I feel that I have dike reinforcement as one of my responsibilities, and we do a lot of interesting things there with new kinds of cooperation with private companies and also innovative ways of working. And I feel that, for example, the building companies could learn a lot from what we do as well, but we don't seem to be able to spread our ideas, I think we could do it better than we do it now. Yes.
I suppose that then becomes the argument is, so in one ways, you don't, because you're slightly removed from the national politics things, you don't have to worry about policy on schools or immigration or any prisons or whatever else. So that means you are protected from having to get involved in those. But the other side of it is that there will be things that affect water quality which are not within your remit, which you just said there about construction or farming is one where we talk again about the pollution in British rivers. Or there is a genuine concern about how much of that does come off farmland as well, or does come off construction sites. And so these things, if they're not within your control, you then can't put pressure on it. So it is, again, it's a funny old system to get round, David.
Yeah,
exactly. But
absolutely.
we also do our lobby work, of course, towards
Yes.
the other governments. But yeah, you're right. Yeah, there's always two sides to it. Yes.
Yeah. Well, also, thank you so much for the time and taking the time to speak to us. Really do appreciate it. If our listeners want to follow the work that you're doing, do you have places like Twitter or Facebook that they can reach you on?
Well, I'm most actively on LinkedIn, a professional network. So people can follow me there. But also Water Natuurlijk as a party, of course, or our regional water board. De Stichtse Rijnlanden.
We might need to put that in the comments, John, for people to find that.
Yeah. Genuinely, thank you, David. Thank you, Els. It's been a brilliant discussion, and it actually really kind of food for thought for how Britain should go forward, what the Lib Dems should do now, because it's all right protesting about sewage in our rivers, but actually you do want to have solutions. What is the way forward for Britain to handle things like our water quality? So thank you very much for coming on today. Thank you for everyone for listening and watching. We really appreciate you logging on. We'll be back with more episodes about everything that's going on regarding the new Labour government, everything that's happening in the States, and how you campaign ready for next year's election. So thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll be back with another episode very soon.